Okay, world history students, it's good to have you back. This is lesson 3a. We're going to continue on with our discussion of Europe and talk a little bit about Europe in crisis. Now, last time we talked a little bit about what was going on related to Africa and Asia because of European expansion, and now we're going to go back and kind of look at some of the internal issues that Europe was dealing with after the change in the Protestant Revolution. So, just like I talked about, a little review. We talked about the African slave trade. We talked about some of the political structures and systems, what happened when the Europeans arrived in both Asia and Africa, and finally a little bit about the systems of politics in the Asian nations, especially around the area that we would consider now to be Indonesia. For this part of the lesson, for lesson 3a, you're going to be taking a look at the first part of chapter 14, specifically pages 429 to 439. That's going to back up kind of what we're talking about here on the video. And then you're going to go ahead and use the video and the reading to help yourself out with the question set. Also, you're going to see in this particular lesson introduced a project. It's going to be a project that will be due at the end of the quarter, but you'll be working on it little by little over the course of the rest of the units. So we'll talk about more of that in your lesson this week. A little bit of a preview. What are we going to talk about in this particular video? Well, we're going to look at the French Wars of Religion. We're going to talk a little bit about Elizabethan England. That's Elizabeth I. We're going to talk a little bit about the 30 Years' War between England and France, and finally finish up with revolutions in England. So we're really talking about a period of transition and revolution going on in the European area. In terms of some key vocabulary, you're going to need to know these terms, and you'll be defining them as part of your lesson. The first one is Huguenots, the Armada, witchcraft, the divine right of kings, and commonwealth. So be looking for those in your reading and be ready to define those in your lesson. So let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about some of the French Wars of Religion. If you recall, we had a split called the Protestant Reformation, where we had a break between Catholicism and this new system of religion called Protestantism. One of the main focal points of Protestantism in France were the Calvinists. So by about 1560, Catholicism and Calvinism were really competing for believers. They wanted to, make sure that their church was the most powerful one in France, and they both were looking for converts. The French kings, however, were Catholic, and French Protestants were persecuted, which means that they were kind of treated as second-class citizens for their beliefs, and they were known as the Huguenots. Okay, so there's one of your terms. And battles between these two groups raged on and off for 30 years, and parts of France tended to be areas where Huguenots were powerful, and parts of France tended to be where the Catholics were powerful. Then King Henry IV of France converted to Catholicism upon his coronation, which means that when he became king, one of the things he had to do was make sure he was Catholic. The kings of France had always been Catholic. And he issued something called the Edict of Nantes. And in the Edict of Nantes, it recognized Catholicism as the official religion of France. So no longer was it possible to have freedom of religion really in France. Now Catholicism is the main religion. The edict also gives the Huguenots the right to worship. So we have a little bit of protection for the Protestants, but we're really looking at Catholicism as the primary religion. If we go across the English Channel and look at what was going on in England at the time, we have a very famous monarch that comes to the throne. And Elizabeth I was her title. We are now, the current Queen of England is actually Elizabeth II, so this is Elizabeth I. She came to the throne in 1558. And one of the things she did, she was a very powerful monarch, and she strengthened the power of the Church of England, which was, as we remember, the breakout between the Catholic Church and the Church of England because of Henry VIII. But she's really looking for a balance of power between France and Spain. She wants to keep them even, because if they're even, no one is the more powerful, and we're really looking, she is anyway, for England to become an ascendant power. She wants England to gain more power. If she can keep France and Spain about even, then that helps her cause. And a big effort to look at England as a powerful nation in Europe happened under what was called the Spanish Armada. Philip II of Spain was a very, very powerful monarch because of all the money he's bringing back from North and South America, and so he decides to invade England. And he develops a huge armada, or group of ships, to fight the English Navy. And this is one of those things where it's the total underdog would be what England was. The Spanish were the most powerful nation. They had the huge navy. They were expected to just kind of wipe the floor with the English. But the English actually, along with the help of some storms that happen in the English Channel, are too powerful for the Spanish force and send them packing back to Spain. And it's a huge defeat for Spanish power and really kind of marks a turning point of power in Europe at the time. Another issue that's going on with this whole religious discussion that's happening in Europe is the rise of witchcraft, or at least the impression that people are witches and there is witchcraft in Europe, and the Inquisition that happens in the Catholic Church leads to some hysteria about witchcraft, assuming that lots of people are witches or possessed by the demon if they don't believe exactly as the Church suggests. People were often falsely accused. The enemies of individuals thought this was a great way to get rid of somebody, is if you called them a witch, and then they were taken away by the Inquisition. There were trials, but oftentimes the trials were led to coerced confessions because of torture, and many people were executed because of their falsely being accused of being witches. Also, we have some pretty brutal wars that occur during this time. The main one was called the 30 Years' War. It's centered around Western Europe and Germany, but around a specific part of Germany called the Holy Roman Empire. So what we would consider now to be Germany and Poland and that part of the world was considered to be the Holy Roman Empire back in the 1500s. And this war is between the Catholics and the Protestants in Germany, but it pulls really all the Europeans in. It's really almost the first world war that we see. At the end of the 30 Years' War, the Peace of Westphalia, which was when they finally came to peace, allowed for religious freedom and ended this big, massive organization called the Holy Roman Empire. The divine right of kings is another thing that's going on at the time. Now, obviously, kings ascend to the throne because of how they're born, but it's also generally believed, or at least during this period of time in Europe, that kings also are lead because of the will of God. So James I, who is a Scottish noble, becomes the King of England and unites the thrones of Scotland and England in 1603, and he believes in this idea that he is destined by God to lead England. And we now are set up between the king, James I, and Parliament, which is an organization of the nobles and the people who are trying to vie to see who's most powerful. And that leads to something called the English Civil War. So just like our Civil War, where we had it between the North and the South in America, the English also had a civil war a couple hundred years earlier in 1642. Their two sides were those who supported the king and the idea of the divine right of the king. Those were called the Cavaliers. And those who supported the Parliament, or the rights of the people. And those were called the Roundheads. I don't know where they came up with that. I suppose everybody has a round head. Maybe their heads were rounder. But anyway, the Roundheads won. And their leader, a guy named Oliver Cromwell, sets up England as a commonwealth, or an organization that's run by the people and the king collectively. And this is one of the first times we're seeing this. So this is a huge movement in terms of political ideology. However, it's really an issue that Oliver Cromwell, is the power and not the idea, because as soon as he dies, the next in line for the throne of England, Charles II, is restored to the throne, although Parliament begins to keep a lot more power than they did. Charles cedes his power to his son, James II, who is a Catholic, and now we're back into this whole issue of Protestantism with the Church of England versus Catholicism, rearing its ugly head in England again. That leads to something called the Glorious Revolution. The Glorious Revolution was initiated by a gentleman named William of Orange, who invades England from Holland in 1688. And because there's a breakdown of the king's structure, the powerful nature of the English kings, Parliament uses that as an opportunity to pass a Bill of Rights. And this Bill of Rights allows that Parliament is the primary source of power in England, and it allows for something called a constitutional monarchy, which is the monarch is still powerful, but all bills and all laws have to go through the Parliament. So it's again changing the way things are done. And it leads to what's called the English Bill of Rights in 1689, which our own Bill of Rights in the United States is based on. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you soon.